Good morning. This is Pastor Ernie Lewis from the Blue Point Church in Sisney, Illinois, with your thoughts for Tuesday. Today, I want us to go back to the Old Testament passages in the book of Exodus, where we see the journeys of Israel. They were headed to the promised land, and after God had delivered them from Egypt and delivered them from the armies of Pharaoh, they stop in the wilderness, and Aaron fashions this golden calf that they bow to and worship. They even say, "This is the God that brought us up out of Egypt." And yet it was an idol made by the hands of man. And God's anger was so strong against them that he told Moses, "I will send an angel and I will direct you to the promised land, but I am not going. This stiff-necked people, if I go with them, I will consume them." But Moses prays this prayer in Exodus chapter 33 and verse 15, where he says, "If your presence does not go with us, do not bring us up from here." In other words, if you're not going, I'm not going. If God is not going to lead us into Canaan, we are not going to go there. And I think that he recognized that without the presence of God, they would live in darkness. We realize that this pillar over their heads was a cloud by day, but it was a pillar of fire by night that not only warmed them out there in the wilderness, it gave them direction and gave them light, and so they could see where they were going. They knew that they would be wandering around aimlessly if it was not for the presence of the Lord. And you know, many seek to live their lives today without the presence of the Lord. And what they do is the same thing. They're wandering around aimlessly, looking for things that they really cannot find. But one of the things we recognize that we have with the presence of the Lord is his direction. In the Old Testament story, whenever the cloud moved, his people moved, They would pick up their tents and follow after because they knew the Lord's direction. He was not only guiding them each day, it was all in his timing. When he needed them to be where they needed to be, they followed. Because with God's presence, they had direction in their lives. And we need his daily direction also. Along with that, in God's presence, they also had protection. There are numerous incidents where God delivered his people, perhaps with this pillar that hid them from the armies of Pharaoh, or the direction he was giving them that protected them from the enemy land that they traveled through. And in this day and age, we need God's protection on our lives, perhaps more than ever. One of the things that they received with God's presence was his boldness. Even in the New Testament, we see those disciples after Acts chapter 2, when the Spirit comes upon them, they have a great boldness, not only to live for God, but to witness for God. And these Old Testament Israelites traveled across enemy lands and even overtook the giants of Canaan with the boldness that they had because of God's presence. And finally, with the presence of the Lord, we also receive his blessings. He gave them a land, he said, that was flowing with milk and honey. He blessed his people over and over again when they sought his presence. Which brings us to today. Which brings us to right now. The idea of seeking God's presence daily will call for communication. We will have to call upon him. We will have to be in constant prayer and communication with the Lord. It also calls for constant submission. Lord, I need your presence. And I know the only way I can have it is when I surrender to you and say, Lord, whatever you want in my life, that's what I'm willing to do. We need to pray this prayer of Moses with the same boldness. Lord, if your presence does not go with me, I'm not going anywhere. Lord, we desperately need your presence.